Happiness isn't what you seek, it's not what you achieve, accomplish, or acquire. It's what you essentially are.
Tell me about it. I'm very intrigued.
Happiness is what you don't think. Happiness is not a state of mind, it's a state of being, right?
Wow, Rob, you speak so well.
I will Venmo you, Thomas. I will Venmo you and PayPal you. Just let me know. I'll send you some money for that compliment, but I appreciate it. So it's like one person calls it happiness, another person calls it joy. At the end of the day, I'm not so much concerned about what we call it. I'm much more interested in the experience of what I call happiness.
And that's the book you should write.
I think I've written that book, Sonny. I think I've written it.
What Rob said, positive thinking and no thinking. It sums it all up. What is happiness? Do you pursue happiness? Is it worth pursuing, or is it in you? Is it around you? You just have to seize it? Is it everybody around you and you can seize it with them together? I have so many questions in my mind. From Rounders, this is Living with Sunny. I'm your host, Sunny Singh, with my friend Thomas Power. Today we are talking about happiness. The guest of our conversation is Rob Mack. Rob is an Ivy League graduate, an author, a TV personality, a happiness coach. And today he's going to talk about a few quick things we can do to bring happiness into our life. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Sonny. How are you?
Rob, when we talk about wellness and well-being, almost every time we introduce the phrase happiness, the word happiness and things around happiness. And I saw your Instagram post that got me. And I quote, "You don't have to seek happiness, you just have to stop seeking unhappiness." And I consider myself the greatest seeker of well-being. And for me, the phrase that you have to stop seeking something in order to seek something. Tell me about it. I'm very intrigued.
You went right in. I love it, Sonny. Absolutely. The challenge, I think, for most of us is that we think of happiness as something that we need to achieve or accomplish or acquire. But my experience, my life experience, and the education I've taken has sort of let me know and taught me that happiness isn't what you seek. It's not what you achieve, accomplish, or acquire. It's what you essentially are. So happiness is a lot easier than I think a lot of us make it out to be. And so part of the challenge and the opportunity with happiness is to learn to let go and to relax a little bit. But I know for a lot of us, that feels like hard work.
Why is it so difficult to focus on joy? And another thing, do you differentiate between happiness and joy? And if you don't, or if you do, why is it so hard to focus on these elements of our life?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Sonny. I think first and foremost, the brain is built and wired with a number of cognitive biases that make happiness difficult. So it's built with a cognitive bias that we might call negativity bias, right? So the problem often gets our attention for good reason. The brain is wired to keep us alive, not necessarily to make us happy, right? And so when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When all you have is a brain, everything looks like a problem to be solved. So that in and of itself is a bit of a problem. So we can blame evolution for part of the reason that we struggle with happiness so much. But the other piece of it is not just, sort of like nature, but also nurture. We're not really taught, how to be happy or how to be joyful or how to be blissful. We're taught how to be productive citizens, and that's got its place and that's very useful. But I think most of us haven't learned where happiness really resides, right? Where to find happiness. So that's the answer to the first question. The second question, and we can go more deeply into that. The second question, but sort of the difference between happiness and joy and maybe fulfillment or bliss. I don't really see a difference between all of those words. I think they're synonyms for the most part. And I think it's easy to get distracted by semantics, right? So it's like one person calls it happiness, another person calls it joy. At the end of the day, I'm not so much concerned about what we call it. I'm much more interested in the experience of what I call happiness, what you might call joy, and what Thomas might call bliss. And so in real life, experience is the only explanation, and the only explanation is experience, and it's too easy to get lost in semantics. So call it what you want, but just do your best to try to experience it.
So Rob, my son believes you can't have happiness or a reward, a pleasure, a bliss, whatever label, a joy, until you've done some work, until you've had some pain, until you've exerted some energy that's been difficult or challenging or hard or physical or mental, and then you're rewarded with the the happiness, the joy. How do you feel about that as a concept that you have to earn your
Yeah,
happiness?
well, there's a lot of truth to what your son says. I mean, your son is obviously very wise. I don't know how old he is, but he certainly sounds wise for his age. I would say that without question, we tend to appreciate more that which we invest our time, energy, effort, resources, and money in. And so, for that reason, yes. But also, notice how many perfectly priceless things you experience already that are perfectly blissful and happy and joyful that you don't have to put any time, energy, and effort into. How great is it to just simply breathe? I mean, how much work and effort do you put into breathing? Like, none at all. The body takes care of that for you, right? And it's just the right mixture of oxygen and carbon dioxide and other, elements in the air. And so, to that end, I would argue that happiness is really effortless when you dive deep enough. But in the beginning, like so many things, it requires a tremendous amount of effort. So the effort leads to effortlessness. But I would say that it's true that we often appreciate things that we work hard for more. That being said, happiness is our natural state. It's the effortless state. It's the stateless state. So it's a state that exists prior to any of those things, not something that exists only after you've achieved or accomplished or acquired what you want. And we know that's true because look at how many things you have in your life now that one day, probably not too long ago, you prayed for, right? And also notice how maybe barely happy or if happier at all you are as a result of all these things you've achieved, accomplished, and acquired.
So you think it's a sort of a mental state because you do meet people who are seemingly unhappy, who are miserable, who talk about their
Yeah.
unhappiness,
Yeah.
and they talk about their state. Is it a state you've got to get into, and is it a state you can fall out of?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that at different levels, right? And so much of this conversation and conversations about happiness really are conversations that come down to a concession. We have to sort of pay a concession to language, right? So language can kind of help describe things, but it can also complicate things. In the beginning of our happiness journey, I think for most of us, we come to a realization that happiness isn't the job you have. It's not how much money you have. It's not the relationships you have necessarily, although it's nice to make a lot of money. I want to make a lot of money. I'm open to receiving lots of money, and I want to have great relationships and even great health without question. That being said, as you continue on your happiness journey, you sometimes discover that you've got a really good life, but you're still miserable. Or you've got a terrible life, but you still have these moments when you're deeply blissful. And so there's a disconnect there. It's like, how can I be happy in seemingly unhappy circumstances? Or how can I be unhappy in seemingly happy circumstances? So you sort of graduate from this idea that happiness is sort of what you have, or that it's even what you do, and you come around to realizing that happiness maybe has more to do with either who you spend your time with, okay, but also what you think, right? That happiness is what you think, that it's an attitude, that it's a mental state. But as you continue along your happiness journey, you often discover that the thought that used to make you so happy when you're 20 makes you miserable at 50 or 60 or 70. Or even with the most positive thinking, you still experience moments of deep anxiety or stress or overwhelm. And you can't simply positive think your way out of the unhappiness or the stress or the overwhelm or the dysphoria or the depression. And so you come around eventually to discovering that happiness isn't what you do, it's not what you have, it's not who you spend time with, although those things all help, and it's not even what you think. Happiness is what you don't think. Happiness is not a state of mind, it's a state of being, right? And so when you find yourself experiencing those moments when you're thoughtlessly, wordlessly aware of what's happening in your life or happening in your mind or happening in your heart, you discover there's tremendous peace in that stillness and silence, in that thoughtless, wordless awareness, in that faceless, formless consciousness. There's a happiness that's lasting and abiding and meaningful. And it doesn't come and go. It doesn't come and visit for a little while and then leave. It's there all the time, underneath even your most positive thinking, even your most positive experiences. It's underneath all of that as a felt sense of peaceful aliveness, right? And so that's really where the rubber hits the road, is that most of us stop at this idea or this notion that happiness is a state of mind. But if we look closely, we'll discover that our happiest moments are often spent when we're not thinking a whole lot at all.
Wow, Rob, you speak so well.
Uh, I will Venmo you, Thomas. I will Venmo you and PayPal you. Just let me know. I'll send you some money for that compliment, but I appreciate it.
So parents ask the children, their child, "Are you happy?" Or a spouse must ask another spouse. But I'm coming to the kids first. Is it fair? Do they even have the faculties, or is it fair to ask your child, "Are you happy?" And can they give an answer, or they are the best people to give the answer intuitively because they're so unlayered?
Yeah, I mean, kids are closer to the source. They're closer to the source of happiness,
That's
right?
right.
They haven't had so many years and decades of programming, and conditioning, and societal messages that to sort of cloud and veil and obscure that natural state of felt peaceful aliveness that I call happiness, that we've experienced as adults. And so I'd say that kids, and that's why they remain playful. That's why they remain creative. That's why they can have an argument and be 100% in the argument for 5 full minutes, and then very next moment completely forget about it and be best friends again. Rarely do you see that happen with adults. Adults are still in their mind reliving what they said and what happened, and then pre-living what they're going to say next time and how it's going to go down next time. And so they're very rarely in the present. And so kids are much closer to the source of happiness. I love inviting kids into a conversation around happiness, not in order to impose your ideas upon them, but to help them stay focused and clear and centered in their own being and in their own intuition, right? I think so much of what we end up doing with kids is in an attempt, a very well-intentioned attempt to educate them on the world and things of the world and the practical things of the world, we often lead them away from the very source of wisdom and knowledge and intuition that exist within them at all times. And it's like the more you seek for that outside of you, the more you forget that it exists inside of you, and before very long it becomes a slippery slope, and you seem to be looking for everything that would make your life whole and happy and complete and full of love outside of you instead of inside of you. And so I love the question. I just think you want to be careful to maintain and hold a space for unconditional judgment, and try not to get in there and impose too many ideas on them, because even with our best effort, we can sometimes impose ideas that just confuses kids more.
I think that's, and Thomas, you probably have views on this too, but I think this is a mandatory course for every parent to understand what question to ask. When you ask a question, are you happy, and to understand it properly, and then to build on it, because it's like, and I feel that the kids are our best teachers. They help us grow the most.
Yes, absolutely.
When I started my first company, it was a pursuit of passion, and my second is a pursuit of love. So I differentiate between passion and love. You do something you're passionate about, you do something that you love. What's your point of view on something, on this context, something you're passionate about and therefore you do it, something you love that you do it, and how does that equate to happiness?
Yeah, boy, Sonny. These questions are so great. I don't get these questions often, and so I would say that happiness and love are not two different energies. They're not two different phenomena. It's the same energy, the same phenomenon, viewed from two different perspectives, seen from two different views, right? So when you're happy and you're introverted and you're spending time with yourself, we just call it happiness, right? But when you're happy and you're extroverted and you're with other people and you're sharing your happiness with other people, we call that love. So introverted happiness is what we call happiness. Extroverted happiness is what we call love. You can also think of it the other way, which is introverted love, we could call happiness, and extroverted love is what we would call love, right? And so an easy way to think about this is when like a rain cloud, think of a rain cloud just becomes so full of all this moisture. And so you kind of want to be a rain cloud. It's like you become so full of peace, love, and joy and bliss that at some point you can't contain it anymore, right? You're just so full of all this joy and peace and love and bliss that you just need to relieve yourself. You need to unburden yourself. And so you just shower all of that peace and love and joy down on the earth. You do it indiscriminately, unconditionally, without any expectation of reciprocity, right? There's no quid pro quo in it at all. You just do it selfishly to relieve yourself of the burden of carrying this happiness around all day. That is love, right? That is love. I think a lot of the things that we think about love is really pseudo love. It's like fake love. It's like, I'll do this thing because I'm loving, but really I'm hoping secretly to get this thing back from you. So it's not really a giving. It's not a joyful overflow. It's not a luxury. It's really me attempting to get something from you by giving something to you up front. And so it's manipulation. It's a business affair.
It's conditional.
Yes, and it's conditional. That's exactly right. So Sonny and Thomas, fantastic question. And I think that's kind of where a lot of us have gone wrong. I know that I've gone wrong there. I'm a poster boy for that. It's like, you think that you're being really unconditionally loving, and you find out later that you weren't at all. You were just trying to get something.
I sometimes say, people say I'm in love or I love somebody. but there's a conditionality attached to it. That means that, oh, that person makes me happy. Well, that's not giving, that's receiving, right?
Absolutely. And this is where it gets tricky. And the language, again, you really, that's why you don't, you want to sort of be able to not just take these kinds of conversations literal, but sort of go deeper and hear what's really being said, because there's so many ways to say it. It's like, on one hand, I want to say true love is unselfish. It's totally unselfish. But that's not entirely true, because actually the most loving people love loving for loving's sake alone. It's like, I'm in love with loving. Like, I just love, and I do it for me, not for you. It's like, if you get benefit out of it, great, but I'm way more selfish than that. It's like, I'm going to love on you because it feels so good to me. And I'm too impatient to wait around to see if you're going to give it back or if you're going to thank me for it. That's just too much. And who knows, I might not be here tomorrow or the next day or whatever. And so I think it takes an authentically selfish person that is willing to love for intrinsic reasons alone to be or to become an authentically selfless person or unselfish person, right? To love in an unconditional way. If you're doing it for any other reason except that it feels good for you, you're going to find yourself quickly disappointed, because people aren't on this earth to necessarily give you what you want just because you want it.
And that's the book I want to read, and that's the book you should write.
I think I've written
Just
that book.
that
Sonny. I
topic.
think I've written it. So I think I've written it. I've written a book called Love from the Inside Out, and it keeps getting pushed back a little, but it's precisely about that, Sonny. I'll probably need some of your advice and guidance for wrapping it up. But yeah, that's the idea, Sonny. You're right about that. It's like, we all need to hear more of that.
In a way, when we talked about love, love should be unconditional, because that gives a permanence of happiness, I
Yeah.
believe. And that's what I'm hearing from you.
And I would argue, Sonny, to your point, the only love worthy of the name love is unconditional love. Same thing
That's
with
right.
happiness. If it's conditional happiness, I don't call that happiness. I call that a pleasurable moment. Happiness is pleasurable, but it doesn't equate or equal pleasure, right? It's exciting, but it doesn't equal and isn't excitement only, right? And love is the same deal. If it's conditional and happiness is conditional, what that means is that your happiness is contingent upon or dependent upon something outside of you, more than likely, and I would call outside of you even the thoughts you think and the feelings you have. And that isn't just happiness. It's like, the way I think it's kind of like, a period between two wars. We call that peace, but is it really peacetime? It's really just preparation for another war. It's like, right? It's like, if you just have a period of love in between two periods of loneliness, I don't call that love. That's just preparation for more loneliness. And a period
Oh,
of happiness between two periods of unhappiness is really just preparation for more happiness. It's not really happiness. There's a deeper felt sense of peaceful aliveness that exists there all along, that's always there, it's ever present, but you might not be or have tapped into it in quite the way that you could.
One should tell themselves when they wake up in the morning is take a moment. No? Is it like the phrase is complete? Take a moment.
Yes.
Throughout your day, take a moment. And that take a moment means just stop everything. Stop the engines,
Yeah.
right? Breathe.
I love that so much, Sonny. And there was a period, in my life, because, I didn't become a happiness coach sort of like intentionally so much. I was a miserable kid, and so miserable that I became deeply depressed. And then I got to a place where I was insanely, incredibly suicidal. I was experiencing suicidal ideation dozens of times a day. And I got to a place where I eventually decided to do some research about that. And I was like, I'm over this life thing. Like, I always thought that if I had made friends and I had a beautiful girlfriend and if I made some money, that I would grow out of my unhappiness. And none of that happened. My unhappiness just became worse and my depression just deepened. So I got to a place, I did some research, I decided I was going to slash my wrist. I went to the kitchen, got a kitchen knife, dug it into my wrist, and, very strange experience happened. I dug it into my wrist. I still have the suicide test marks there. You probably can't see them too well on the screen there. But
my God.
yes, in that moment that I dug that knife in there, I mean, Sonny and Thomas, I wasn't expecting this. I was expecting really not a whole lot except hopefully the end of my pain. But I experienced in that moment a sort of indescribable peace and ineffable joy and true love that I had never experienced before. And for no seemingly good reason.
In the moment when the knife
Yes,
went in.
yes. Like right then and there. Like, and so at that moment I was like, well, I don't know what that was, but I should probably, I can, postpone this suicide thing for a little while. Now, at the time, it was just like 15 minutes. I wasn't even committed to the 15 minutes, honestly, and now it's laughable because it's like 15 minutes, Rob, that blows by. But at that point, it's a very tall, ambitious order for me. I thought, there's no way I'm going to make 15 minutes, but I'm going to just, for now, okay, I can always do this thing later. And I started doing some research, and I started discovering, like, oh my gosh, there are lots of people that feel this way, have felt this way, and there are also lots of people out there in the world, like Sonny or Thomas, that are happy or that are focusing on happiness that know a whole lot about happiness. So maybe I should learn from these smart people. I was smart enough to know I was not very smart and that there were smarter people I could learn from, right? So I went down this path. And so it was only because I was being intentionally selfish and wanted to be happy that I was even led eventually to becoming a happiness coach. And so I say all that because there was a period in my journey when, to your point, I would just stop and notice, first of all, if I was doing something unhappy, I would stop it immediately. Like if I just felt unhappy doing something, I would just stop it. That didn't mean I was going to stop it forever, but just for a moment. I would just stop and take a moment and just breathe. And just breathe. And I discovered that that alone helped me get through a lot of times and periods of my life when I didn't think I could get through it. But this taking a moment thing is huge, and it's so huge I actually developed a practice which we'll get to later. But I think it's incredibly important to take and cherish and honor and acknowledge that this moment you have here and now is precious and priceless and irreplaceable.
So, Rob, I've been with half a dozen people as they've died, holding their hands and seeing them out to the next place, wherever that next place is, if there is another place. And they all describe what you talked about with your hand when you put your knife into your wrist. That state of love, that state of bliss, that moment of peace, that moment of happiness, as they come to the end, as if they're falling into that dream that you described earlier, that sort of happiness you feel when you know you're going to fall into that lovely dream. Perhaps dreams are pre-prep for death or the next life. When you had that moment of bliss caused from the pain of the knife going into your wrist, surely you would have pushed it further in to have more bliss. But you didn't push it further in, you pulled it out. So how did you decipher that?
Yeah, so I will be honest, there was very little to no deciphering. There was just an instinct, just the instinct alone, and there's intelligence obviously in instinct. I mean, you just notice how all of the critical life and bodily functions go on without our intellectual effort, right? We don't have to think about beating our heart or breathing our lungs. And so it was just instinct, there was a recognition there that I can't explain to this day. And what I've been trying to understand since then, partly what you just asked me about, but also like what happened there that allowed me to experience this peace, love, and joy that I hadn't experienced in any other fashion, no matter how hard I tried and no matter what else I achieved or accomplished or acquired or did with my life. And it's taken me quite a while, but that's why I've come to this recognition that it wasn't something that I thought, okay? It wasn't something that I wasn't doing anything. I was taking something into my wrist, but I've had all kinds of things happen before to my body. And so it wasn't about my body either being in jeopardy or my body being in pain necessarily that led to the peace, love, and joy. Although I will argue that when you're in severe pain or pleasure, the mind tends to go quiet, and that's part of the key. For once in my life, my mind was genuinely quiet. There was a stillness and silence that had always been there. It's all pervasive. But I recognized it and realized it in that very moment. I was sort of like aware of it and tapped into it. And that peace, love, and joy that I experienced was that stillness and silence felt. There was a felt sort of appreciation or recognition of that stillness and silence. And that is why I call it happiness. right? And that's also why I say it's not a state of mind, it's not a state of mood, it's not a state of relationships, right? It's not a lifestyle status, it's none of those things. It's something that is beneath or prior to all of the experiences and thoughts and feelings and sensations and perceptions that you have. And that's why most of us overlook it. And that's why you also see in all kinds of scriptures all across the world, doesn't matter what religious or spiritual tradition, if you dive deep enough, if you look at it through a mystic's eyes, you hear things like, closer to us than our own breathing, nearer to us than our own hands and feet, right? It's not that it's too far to recognize, it's too close to see.
If you look at most people today, we talked about it, struggle with happiness, with being happy and with happiness. What is the one simple thing we can tell humanity that look, you're struggling with happiness, you're unhappy for all reasons, right and wrong, good or bad? What's one simple thing they can do or think or whatever to help address that struggle with happiness? A simple message to humanity. What can we tell humanity about this?
Yeah. So I'm going to break it down to two things. The first is just simply positive thinking. We'll call it that, okay? But I want to clarify what I mean by that. It's telling a truthful but better feeling story about everything and everybody in your life, starting with yourself, right? It's critical. So you have $0 in your bank account. Are you broke? The way I would normally refer to myself, I'm broke and my life is over, it's a disaster. Or is there only up from here? There's only up from here. That's a truthful, better feeling story. There's a huge piece of this, which is being sort of a selective sifter of experience and being really intentional about the language that you use with yourself and others and doing it simply to feel better. If you feel better, you'll do better and your life will go better. That's what the entire field and science of positive psychology shares with us, is that if you can just find a way to feel better, even without all the stuff you want, somehow, magically, miraculously, you tend to get most of the stuff you want, right? And you get it more easily and effortlessly and enjoyably by doing so. So tell a better feeling story based in truth about everything and everybody in your life, including yourself, and do it until it becomes a habit. That's number one. And the second thing I'll share, so that's the positive thinking approach. Not everybody likes that approach. It's difficult in the beginning, but it makes everything else easy in the end. The other approach is what I would call micromeditation. So with this experience of suicide, sort of suicide attempt that I had, I discovered over time that it wasn't by thinking more or necessarily even thinking positively that I could experience the deepest peace, love, and joy. It was by actually thinking less. And so the first meditation course I took, I'm pretty sure I had a panic attack, at least I felt like I did, and I wasn't very good at meditation like most of us. And I realized pretty quickly an hour was too long, 30 minutes was too long, 5 minutes was too long. But I discovered I could do one breath. And so a micromeditation, and this is the most transformative tool I've ever discovered in my 20 years as a coach and a positive psychology expert. A micromeditation is one breath. For one moment and for one breath, you pretend sincerely that it's the last breath and the last moment you'll ever get on the planet, that you'll ever have on earth. It's your last moment, okay? And so you want to enjoy this breath and this moment as deeply as humanly possible while not letting thoughts get in the way. So thoughts may surface, they may come to mind, you might have sensations or perceptions, but you just notice them and you let them go away. And so you're wanting to milk or juice that one breath for as much joy and happiness as you can possibly experience out of it. If you do this one thing and you do it as consistently as you can, so just as you go throughout your day, just do it as frequently as you can. No matter what else you're doing, you're Swiffering, you're folding clothes, you're listening to someone, you practice this micromeditation. In the beginning, never more than one breath at a time. But if you practice it consistently, in about 22 to 66 days, you'll rewire your brain neuroplastically for an easier, sort of more effortless experience of peace, love, and happiness, right? So in other words, your brain rewires itself to do it automatically, to do it easily and effortlessly. So I'd say those are my two best tips. I reduce that and simplify that down to there's positive thinking, which is really telling a truthful, better feeling story about your life and what's happening in your life. And then there's no thinking, which is what I would call micromeditation.
Our listeners know that in every conversation that we do, we end the conversation with a call to action. What can you do today? And so, listening to Rob, putting all thoughts together in this conversation, I would say the next time that, or sometime today, when you have a negative thought, or you're feeling for some reason unhappy, live in the now and take a nice deep breath. What Rob said, positive thinking and no thinking. It sums it all up. So the next time today, when you have a negative thought and you're feeling unhappy, take a moment, take a deep breath. Rob, thank you for what an invigorating, exciting, just a thought-provoking conversation. And if you want to follow Rob and know more about it, please go to coachrobmack.com. We want to hear more from you, friends. You can reach us at livingwithsunny@round.class. Thank you for being with us, Rob. It was an exciting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.